All right, we can get started now, and we'll just let people join as they come in at the beginning here. My name is Josh Goldberg. I'm a 2L and the president of the Sports Entertainment Fashion and Art Law Society at FIU Law. This is our third day of the symposium, so if it's your first day joining us, thank you. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. We hope you can join us throughout the rest of the week. I want to thank all of our panelists, Justin, John, Adam, and Zach, for joining us here today. We have an amazing panel planned, and I'll hand it over to Zane Katz and Justin Coffey, who will be moderating the panel here today.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate everyone being here as well. Thanks to Justin for helping me out co-moderating the panel, and thank you to all four panelists for being here. I'm going to start by introducing each one of them. First, we have Zach Rich, who is lead counsel at Facebook Realty Labs. He supports social VR and avatars product teams for the Oculus VR platform. He was part of the team that brought Facebook Messenger to the Oculus platform, and we want to thank you for being here with us today. Our next panelist is John Laster. He is a technology attorney and founder of Laster Law. He works with startups and major tech companies handling a wide variety of legal issues in the gaming industry. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Next, we have Justin Jacobson. He is the vice president of the Jacobson Law Firm in New York City. He works with professional athletes, musicians, producers, gamers, streamers, and many other people in the entertainment industry. He works very closely with talent in franchise leagues like Overwatch and the Call of Duty Pro League. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, we have Adam Gertz, who is Senior Counsel and Director of Esports for Morrison Rothman. Morrison Rothman represents more esports players and content creators than any other firm in the country. So we thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Now, I want to start before we get started. Esports and gaming industry is a relatively new legal specialty, and I wanted to give the audience a little perspective on the players and entities that make up the industry. So Adam, can you kind of give us a little breakdown of the industry? And then I'd love to hear thoughts from the other three panelists.
Yeah, so I mean, esports is kind of an umbrella term, right? I think it encompasses multiple games within multiple industries or within multiple types of games, almost as if you could say sports, for example. Esports is almost like saying sports at this point. Yes, it's professional video gaming, but there are, so many different games out there, and they're also different in terms of style of play and the type of player they attract. So, for example, you have League of Legends, which is what they call a massive online battle arena, which is wholly different from like a Call of Duty or a Counter-Strike, which are first-person shooters, or Overwatch. And then you have Rocket League, which is professional or not professional. It's rocket-powered cars playing soccer, and pretty much everything in between. Now, I would also lump in esports at this point content creation, because a lot of what the top tier esports leagues or teams are doing is moving towards more of a content creation model. You see this with teams like 100 Thieves, NRG, FaZe, and while they're fielding teams in the professional leagues, like 100 Thieves has, for example, it's LA Thieves Call of Duty team. Energy has, Rocket League, Overwatch teams, etc. They are hiring quote unquote content creators left and right, because a lot of the economics of esports and this sort of new entertainment wave we're experiencing right now is better served by the content creation platform. So I would lump in there as well. And what I mean when I say content creation in this context is primarily people making live streaming on Twitch, whether that's gameplay, whether they're so-called variety streamers who have their own sort of not necessarily gameplay, but perhaps gameplay adjacent, or sometimes not even gameplay related shows on Twitch or YouTube. And then you also see kind of a model like BuzzFeed, I think pioneered 7 or 8 years ago, where they have sort of these teams have teams of creators. They go out and they make their own sort of, funny videos or what have you, and they put them on YouTube. But overall, esports is, a massively growing industry, whether you're talking the content creation side or the esports more traditional side. Ton of money, both in terms of buy-ins, in terms of endemic and non-endemic sponsors, and obviously, I think the pandemic helped fuel some of that growth because people were stuck at home and couldn't really experience traditional live entertainment the way we have been used to. But it's also growth that's being driven by Gen Z and younger millennials. So I think it's definitely something that's here to stay.
Yeah, I think, kind of building off what Adam said, I think, an important distinction, especially in today's, industry is, you have esports and gaming. So I think some of the content creators and streamers kind of are more, broad than just competitive players. And I think that's what's, a really nice distinction. And what's going on here is it's not just about you having to be a competitor playing in tournaments or organized leagues, but you can also be a host or just, create your own little videos. And, as you mentioned, you have content creator houses, and whether orgs or just a bunch of, TikTok guys getting a house together and just working with each other and creating content and pushing it out and using all these social media platforms. And I think another interesting thing about the industry is, you kind of have these really primary players. So you kind of have the talent, which are the gamers and the streamers and these content creators. And then you have the teams and orgs. And usually these teams kind of sign these players and are essentially kind of the way we think of like a traditional NFL team, where they sign players and they pay them a salary and they're kind of involved in what the team is doing. And then you have the game publishers, who are actually people that create and own the games. And, they're a very dominant force in the industry because, they own the rights to the game that everybody's playing. And then we also have the event organizers, who are actually organizing the different tournaments and leagues and competitions that these individuals are competing in.
Yeah, and I look at what Justin and Adam have just said, and I'm actually going to take a total opposite view. This isn't a new industry. Esports has been around for an extremely long time. It is new to the United States and North America market, but if you look at the Asian markets, StarCraft and StarCraft 2, those players in those markets were looked at as, the top quarterbacks in the NFL for the United States for a comparison. The interactive entertainment industry as a whole has grown, and as Adam mentioned, it's now not just video games, it's content creators, it's streamers. It's the entire concept that entertainment is no longer a passive experience. It has become a very interactive experience. But the industry itself is extremely underserved by legal support. There are a handful of firms at best that have lawyers that understand this industry. You have developers and publishers, and with the rise of indie developers that have never formed an LLC before, they don't know how to negotiate a contract. It's four guys who got a house together to build their first indie game and never knew how to set up a partnership agreement. And when one person starts hating the other one, all of a sudden everything blows up and they don't know what to do about it. It is extremely common. And what I point to when I talk to other lawyers about this is people think gaming and they think child's play. What they don't think of is that the gaming industry as a whole makes more money than music, television, and movies combined. So let just blow your mind there for a second. And the older generation of lawyers look at that and they think, oh, well, I don't want to be involved in this. Like, this is child's play. But these are clients who pay the bills. These are clients who are hungry for help, and there is not a lot of information out there for them, and they've never hired a lawyer before. And you're going to see that sort of evolve over time.
No, and just to kind of jump in off what Zach just said, again, we're talking about gaming and esports and content creation today, but the picture when you get outside of esports to just gaming as a whole, or even just spatial computing tech, is it's massive. It's absolutely massive, and it kind of even dwarfs just like, the esports component of it. That's kind of become the kind of sexy buzzword recently, but gaming as a whole is just getting huge. Roblox just IPO'd. I will challenge you to find someone under the age of 10 who has not at least interacted with that game in some way. And it's just absolutely massive what we're looking at. And like Zach said, you're running into a lot of people who have never really had formal business training when they decide they want to start a game. It's a very creative path. Same thing with streaming. Same thing with, honestly, a lot of these esports athletes. You know, it skews young, especially when we start talking about esports and content creation. It's definitely going to skew very heavily on the young side. But even when you start talking about indie devs, they don't necessarily have that formal business acumen or legal acumen, and that's why they need that support.
Thank you. I want to ask a question to Zach specifically. You work a lot with virtual reality with Oculus at Facebook. Can you explain a little bit about what you do there and some of the maybe novel legal issues that you run into on a daily basis?
Absolutely. So my role is called product counsel. It's a relatively new concept in the legal field. And what a product counsel does is our whole purpose is to take a product from conception to launch. And that's handling everything from trademark IP issues to commercial issues to regulatory and privacy issues. So you really have to be a jack of all trades. My team, we support the social element and gaming elements of Oculus. So we're working with third-party and first-party developers. We are working on how do we make VR more social, whether that's bringing in Facebook elements like Messenger into the Oculus platform. We have a virtual world that we are building called Horizons, which once it's out in public, it will be something similar to a Ready Player One experience. And we're seeing this industry overnight explode. When we launched the Quest 2, we dwarfed our Quest 1 sales. We're seeing upwards into 3, 4, 5 million units sold, and it's only been a handful of months. In fact, we believe internally that we're the reason why Sony is now coming out talking about their new headset for their platform, which a few months ago they were sitting here telling us it's not a priority for us. We'll look at this at some point in time. Probably later in 2023. Now, when they see that VR has become mainstream, it's hitting an inflection point where users are buying this and consuming content. And Facebook really is one of the biggest and only true players who can create a standalone headset at a price point that is accessible to everybody, that they're now releasing news talking about what their headsets will look like. And I believe that VR and AR will be the future of entertainment going forward.
Yeah, no, I just want to go further. We talked a few weeks ago about some of the privacy issues that go along with Oculus. Can you talk about the difficulty in navigating, like we talked about, the different states' approaches and how a lot of these laws haven't been set in stone. So there's a lot of different opinions on what the actual legal standards are.
Yeah, absolutely. So. It's a giant mess. So you have, within the United States, you have 50 different states with 50 different privacy laws, breach notification laws. Everyone now taking a look at what California did with the CCPA, trying to come up with some mimic of that. You have the federal government dragging their feet on a federal privacy law. And then on the flip side, you have the EU with the GDPR. They just wrote what they're called the e-privacy directive, which will soon become the e-privacy regulation, which prevents collection and process of metadata with regards to content and message content. You have Japan coming out with a very similar law called the TBA. And all these laws were either new in the case of GDPR or CCPA, or refined in the case of the privacy directive and Japan's TBA. But these laws aren't meant, they are meant to capture the technologies, but they weren't written for this tech. And so we're looking at 20-year-old laws that were updated to try and be more like a giant fishing net to capture this areas, but there is no guidance on how to comply with any of it. For a great example, Facebook has fantastic content moderation and child protection tools within Messenger and with all Instagram Direct. And in the EU, their laws are forcing us to turn off this content scanning to protect the youth. And what I mean by that is Facebook uses AI to scan message content to highlight and rank users who engage in activities like grooming, sending inappropriate pictures to minors. And then the system gets flagged for an internal human review, and that gets reported, at least in the United States, to an organization called NetMech, when they work with local law enforcement to go after these individuals. In the EU, we were forced to turn that off. And we went to regulators and we said, well, what's more important to you, privacy or child protection? And they said, oh, well, privacy, 100%. And we're just baffled by that concept where you don't want to protect your youth. You'd rather worry about whether or not AI is looking at message content. And we're seeing some of these trends now throughout the entire country, and we have to juggle a risk-based approach where is the fine that we'll pay worth it to make sure that our integrity as a company is protected.
Do any of you guys, the other panelists, want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think a point that, Zach brought up is how the law and what's kind of passed is way behind what's actually going on with the industry. And, I think this can go to, with privacy policies or, a lot of stuff in immigration and visas with, players from other countries trying to come here and vice versa. The actual law and legislature are way behind what's going on in the industry. And it's one of these things where they're playing catch up a lot and they just don't really move quick enough. And, as you see, you have to kind of balance these different considerations. Is it worth protecting the youth from, kiddie porn or, complying with the EU regulations? And it kind of comes down to the law just isn't up to where it should be, that you shouldn't really have to make this kind of decision. Like, to us, you should be able to protect both. There should be some middle ground. You should be able to protect the end user, and you should also be able to protect the privacy.
I also want to touch on Zach said from a slightly different perspective, because I think the audience here is primarily law students. So, he's talking about privacy law and the ever-changing, landscape that entails. And I think, as law students, looking to break into this industry, which is, I think, a competitive industry to get into as far as entertainment. I think learning privacy and getting your certification and sort of being able to market yourself as an expert in that area would be super useful, because these laws aren't going away, and as Justin and Zach just touched on, they're obviously behind the curve of the technology. So if you're looking to get into this from a legal perspective, I think one of the most useful things to do would be to start looking at these privacy laws, familiarizing yourself with them, and thinking about how they can potentially be modified to better position the laws to reflect the state of the industry.
No, and what Adam just said is pretty key. If you want to get involved in this industry, you need to figure out something that you can kind of become an expert at. Whether it's privacy law, whether it's learning skills game contest exemptions, which again is another issue that across all 50 states gets chaotic really, really fast. There's plenty of different spaces within this. If you want to work in games, it's very wide. You could be an immigration attorney that works in games. You can be a tax attorney that works in games. Honestly, we're probably lacking severely in people at the high end of that who actually understand that space, especially when it starts coming to streamers and esports athletes who, again, I work with a lot of wealth management people, and they always joke NFL means not for long. Well, esports means even shorter. It is just a fact. You're aged out by 27 typically, if not before that.
Thank you, guys. I want to talk and move on to the next topic of content creation and how it relates to DMCA. So, John, can you take this one first? With the increase in popularity of the streaming platforms like Twitch, Facebook, YouTube, can you talk about some DMCA issues and the difficulty in advising sometimes younger clients and streamers on the kind of the perils of DMCA?
Yeah, I can reference this one a little bit firsthand, because I was actually a Twitch partner for a while before even going to law school. And the reality of this is, back then, like, you didn't think about it. You just play whatever music you want to play in the background. Twitch said, I believe back in November of last year, that they went around during the pandemic, they went from about 50 complaints a week to suddenly like 5,000 or something, where it just started like drastically ramping up. And the reality is, like, this is a perfect example of where the legislation is not necessarily caught up with the way things work. And we're going to have a big messy situation moving forward at some point, because there's questions about the legality of even just streaming to begin with. It's one of those things where typically the game creators have their own policies that they will basically say, yeah, we want you to stream our game. Ironically enough, sometimes you'll also see artists say the same thing, but they may not have their own music rights. Their music rights might be held by another portfolio that is held by somebody that's not even attached to the artist at this point. And that artist may not have the ability to kind of give that permission. I don't want to go into the nuts and bolts of what DMCA is. This is a law student group. I'm assuming you guys kind of know the gist of that stuff. But where this starts getting chaotic again is the fact that, for example, Metallica just played at BlizzCon, and Twitch had their auto DMCA stuff flag it immediately and had to mute it. And that's where we're starting to see that this stuff isn't even kept up correctly there, because I guarantee you Activision, when they had Metallica come play at a event that was being live streamed, expected that they'd probably have Metallica on the stream. And Metallica, ironically enough, is kind of a good example of a group that was fighting against something like Napster back in the day, which is where a lot of this stuff kind of bubbled to the top in, the general public's knowledge of it.
Yeah, I think I want to touch on what John mentioned, which is very key. Like, you're obviously, everybody here is, in the legal profession or a law student in some way. And, if you're looking at the letter of the law, if you're looking at the letter of copyright law, streaming a game on Twitch for an extended period of time probably isn't, fair use, right? It's probably not, at least how the copyright laws are written, probably not something that is technically legal, but it's something that's certainly tolerated, and it's something that's, as John mentioned, is encouraged by certain publishers. But you saw, Nintendo several years ago was trying to crack down on this and loosen their grip, so to speak, due to public outcry. But it is, I think, not necessarily a challenge of the industry, because as we mentioned, from a business perspective and also a PR perspective, the publishers tend to want their games to be streamed. But it is just another example, I think, of the law kind of being behind the curve, so to speak, in terms of catching up to the state of modern entertainment.
And we're dealing with this at a very interesting and unique way right now with Horizons, which is Facebook's virtual worlds. And we give our creators tools to build whatever they want. And of course, as you've seen it now with Roblox, you've seen it with Minecraft, you've seen it with any of these sort of world building games. What do people do? They build things they know. And we've had to completely redo our rights and DMCA reporting, because we're seeing our creators go in and create Moe's Tavern from The Simpsons. We've had creators go on and create rides at Disney that you can now experience in a virtual world. And the last thing we want to do is piss off Disney. Just like Nintendo, these are companies who are very strict on reporting, and they're very strict on protecting their rights. And it's a strict balance. Like, how do we allow users to have the creativity to build anything they can imagine, and at the same time, how do we balance that against protecting ourselves and our users against takedown requests and any sort of legal action?
Yeah, I think the protection, just from a player content creation perspective, that's one of the biggest legal battles we have when you're representing sort of that side of it. John mentioned that he was a Twitch partner. We represent a ton of Twitch partners, and you get that Twitch partnership agreement. And I don't mean to single out Twitch at all, but you get that agreement, and you're signed exclusively to Twitch. They pay you a good amount of money to do that, but it basically, there's a lot of stuff in there from the creator's side that says, you're making basic reps and warranties that you have the right to be using all this content that you're putting out there. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone back and forth with Twitch on that, basically saying, look, you guys know they don't have the rights, and we're trying our best here to accommodate you, but we don't want to be left holding the bag, so to speak. And from Twitch's perspective, I completely get where they're coming from, but that's one of, I think, the biggest challenge in negotiating these types of deals, is sort of allocating the risk in that regard. If one day a publisher is like, you know what, to hell with the PR, I want some royalties if people are going to be streaming my game.
Yeah, and obviously this is not a Twitch specific issue. It's just easy to single them out as a very obvious example. And the fact that they've even kind of highlighted it themselves to basically say, we know our creator tools aren't good enough. It shouldn't be a question of, do you delete your entire archive of past work because of the fact that you played a game called Alan Wake that had a licensed song in it that the license lapsed from the game to begin with. And then not only that, you never had the license to perform it in the stream to begin with either. so there's multiple issues on something like that one,
I mean, I think that what's nice is that there actually are options, though, that streamers and talent can really actually have licensed stuff. For instance, Monster Cat, which is a very well-known EDM label, they actually have a subscription service where for $20 a month, you can have access to all their music license, and you could play it on stream, and you could use it in any YouTube videos. And I know Amazon Music has a streaming extension that they're starting to integrate in Twitch, where if the user has a subscription to Amazon Music, the streamer can actually play music through that and you can hear it. So I think that, coming from the creator side, whether it's the music or talent in general, is you need to protect your creator. The labels, the publishers, people who invested millions of dollars in, this industry, they have a say and they need to be able to, recoup some of their expenses on this money. And, if you're playing a Kanye or Drake song, like there's a reason you're playing it, and there's a reason you're selecting these music and incorporating it. If it didn't matter, then you can just go to, some royalty free or some kind of thing where you just pay $100 for a license and can use it forever you want. And then kind of the other points that people were bringing up is, I know, for instance, YouTube and some of these other streaming platforms have actually entered into licensing agreements with the publisher themselves to ensure that anything that you're streaming as an individual is licensed and you're not kind of violating these agreements that, Adam and some of these other individuals were referring to, because it is licensed. And they just kind of get cut in on, the ad revenue, because at the end of the day, Warner and Sony want to get paid just the same way, YouTube and Google and everyone else does.
Yeah, there are several, I think what Justin mentioned, sort of, for lack of a better term, clearinghouses for some of the music on Twitch. And I think that's sort of a great way to go about getting some of those rights, because like we were talking about in the beginning, these players are not sophisticated, or creators I should say, are not sophisticated business or legal actors. They don't know what the DMCA is. They see everyone doing it and they're like, I'm just going to do this too, and then they get hit with the DMCA. They got to take all these streams and videos down, and they're like, what just happened? So I think a lot of our roles as attorneys, I think, is in addition to the legal protection and the legal advice side of it, is just, putting out there the lay of the land for folks so they can help understand what their responsibilities are and how they can go about doing this in a less risky way.
And I know that over at Facebook Gaming, for instance, they've actually entered into agreements with some of these music licensees to be able to have licensed music on your stream. So if you're a Facebook gamer, you've already done that. And some of the RAA and some of these other music lobbying groups have, reached out to Amazon and are trying to urge them to be like, okay, look, Facebook is doing it because they understand that there's added value to a streamer to be able to play the pop music that you want to hear. But if you want to play it, there has to be some kind of give or take here. So I think that sooner than later, Twitch and probably YouTube and whoever else hasn't kind of licensed their music will, follow suit.
Yeah, and one of the nice things, at least recently in my experience, is it's less a question of do you need an attorney for a lot of these content creators and streamers. They're starting to realize they do. It's more a question of, can I find one who knows what they're talking about in my space, and B, am I going to listen to what they tell me? Because the reality is, a lot of times you'll tell them something.
They never listen.
They sit back and say, well, this company wants to pay me X amount of money to play video games. I want X amount of money to play video games. I don't want to jeopardize that for anything, despite the fact that the points you're bringing up to them are stuff that are going to bite them in the butt if they don't take them seriously, 2-3 years down the road. And I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle in a lot of ways moving forward, is just being able to explain in an empathetic way that kind of helps them understand stuff that they don't know.
And I think that's the biggest thing that I kind of, see dealing with talent, that, they're very, as mentioned earlier, they're very unsophisticated. This might be the first contract that they're, ever seeing. It might be the first time that, they're forming an entity, or even really having to file taxes and having to deal with, especially when you have international play and you're winning money overseas, these things start to come in and it gets really complicated. And if you don't understand, well, okay, wow, I don't understand this, or, this 20-page, 30-page agreement this team is sending me, my cousin or friend that's a lawyer, he may be able to look at it, but it's really not the same as someone who's dealing with it on a day-to-day basis understands what you can ask for, what other teams are offering. And, you know, you see what these teams are offering other players, where it's like, I know that this kid got this deal, so don't tell me that you can't get this deal. And it just kind of starts to differentiate the people that are actively doing it and understanding it, and, you know, those who just, you know, write it on their LinkedIn.
And it's a huge problem within this industry is these individuals, they're young. They're seeing the bottom line. They're looking at the top part of the contract that says for XYZ, we're going to pay you XY amount. And that's all they care about. One of the first clients I represented in this space, he signed a deal with an energy drink company. The deal expired within a year. He had a clause in it that he could not be seen promoting or encouraging a competitor that survived 2 years past the expiration of the contract. He goes out and he buys a Red Bull fridge because he thinks it looks cool in his background for no other reason. And next thing you know, he's being sued and you can't understand why. And that's sort of the big issue for this industry as a whole, is that these are young, unsophisticated individuals as far as legal goes. They don't understand why they can or cannot do something. They're typically solos who have not set up any form of corporate protection, whether it be an LLC or formed a group together and created an S or a C Corp, and they have liability and they just don't understand what that is.
I couldn't really agree more with that. It's getting better now, but you know, back in the day, you know, some of these kids wouldn't even care about the money so much. They would just be happy to be a part of the org. And there would be, for lack of a better term, unfortunately, most of these have been weeded out. But predatory orgs who would be like, okay, you know, you can say you're a part of us and, you know, we'll give you a shirt, but, you know, you're locked into those same types of exclusivity provisions that Zach just mentioned. And now you're getting to the point where most of these esports agreements, whether they're for esports creators professional players or content creators, when they're joining these tier one orgs, they're upwards of 40 pages long. And they have multiple clauses in there, most of which have nothing to do with how much the player is getting paid, and a lot of which are quite restrictive. And, you know, I don't know if we're going to get into this later, but it's, you know, in terms of how much control they're exercising over the player, how in terms of exclusivity and what they can do and how many promotional obligations they have. And this is something that is incumbent upon the attorneys and the agents to explain to the players, like, what this means, what a right of first refusal actually is, and what rights that gives the org, what this exclusivity actually means, and what that means you can do when you're not doing something on behalf of the org, what you have to wear every day, what you can say in public, etc. This is all laid out in these agreements. And, you know, as Zach mentioned, a lot of times they don't understand or don't want, you know, to take the time to do it. And I'm not blaming them. Like we said, they're young kids. They just got, you know, a 6-figure deal to go play League of Legends professionally, sometimes more. And they're like, yeah, let me just do this. I don't care what it says. I'll sign away. And so what that mindset creates is a lack of leverage on part of the players. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges there. It's getting, okay, this stuff that's in the fine print, let me explain to you what it means and why it's important. Because you should have leverage, because you are one of the best players and most popular content creators in the world, and you shouldn't just sign anything. And I think that's from a player side anyway, that's a big challenge.
Yeah, and I think what Adam said, the tier one orgs are getting cleaned up a good bit because they get vetted, because they do so many deals that they get seen. The reality is there's all the way down to like tier 15 in a sense. You'll have random, I don't know, a gym that just decides they want a video game content creator and signs them to some crazy management deal, you know, which no attorney would have ever let the person sign ever. You know, that basically guarantees that they now own your brand, they now own your likeness, they now own your name, you know, they now own your Twitch channel, you know, all these kind of crazy clauses in there that are borderline unconscionable to begin with. And the problem there is once you've already signed it, you have to pay a lot of money to get out of that. Because I mean, I come from the perspective of, you know, I was a Twitch partner. I want to help these guys. But at the same time, when it starts taking court time, you know, it costs money, costs time, you know, and it gets much more difficult to get someone out of a bad deal than it is to get them into a good deal if they would have had representation from the start.
If anyone's familiar
I'm sure
with,
Justin can, sorry, go ahead.
Also, just real quick, if anyone's familiar with what was going on with the WWE and how they are owning their wrestlers' likenesses, that was sort of where esports was for a while, and where some of these, as John mentioned, the tier 15 orgs were doing. But because of attorneys like Justin and John and my boss Ryan Morrison, it's hopefully moving away from that direction.
Yeah, I mean,
and Justin can talk about it more, but you're seeing these tactics, not just the WWE, but these were used in the music industry for years. It was labels giving you extremely large loans and then taking out everything of your royalties. You're seeing it now in the music industry with these 360 deals, where labels now take a piece of everything, and it's just expanding now into other forms of entertainment.
yeah, and I think like I always kind of use the correlation of record labels and esports teams are very similar in the kind of the mindset and even the way they operate. You see FaZe Clan and XZ and some of these 100 Thieves, that they're much more than just we're pro gamers. We're more of a lifestyle organization. We have musicians and content creators, and we're doing fashion drops, and we're really using our platform to build whoever is part of us. And that's kind of the mentality behind the record label, where it's like, we sign you artists, and because you're signed to Sony, we now have all these connections and opportunities. You're going to get all these looks because you're with us. And we're not making any money from music. Spotify pays, half of a penny. Digital music is a joke. So it's like the only money you're making is from everything else. So, how else do we, keep it all going? And, I think that, from some of the stuff you guys mentioned with the player agreements, is I've seen some things that shock me. I've seen agreements that players have signed where the team can terminate it anytime and the player can never terminate it. And I saw 10 different players sign the same agreement. And it's just like, I don't even think that's an enforceable provision that that you can't terminate something for material breach that's not cured. But even more than that is like, did you even know that what this said this? And a lot of them like, oh, I don't know. Like the guy just said, sign in and let's go. And, I think that everyone here can, echo that sentiment where, one time I was on the phone with a player for like 3 hours going through one of these agreements. Next day, I don't hear from him. The following day, he's like, oh, I just signed the agreement. The team said, we just got to get everyone in market. And it's like, oh, then what was the point of me helping you if you're just not even going to take any of it in? And it's just, you're laughing because this happens. And it's a shame when, you're trying to help them. You have their best interest at heart because you want them to succeed and they still don't listen.
Well, and one of the biggest issues you see is the player trusts the coach or the player trusts one of the other players. And the reality is that org sometimes will use that relationship to exploit the guy to sign. Because they will tell the coach, oh yeah, just tell him it's good, and the coach will tell him, oh yeah, you're good. Don't worry about that. All those exclusions that say that you can't work with a company in X, Y, and Z markets. Oh, we'll just waive those if you bring us a deal that's better than the one we have. Well, that's not on paper. And the thing I always tell people is I trust paper a lot more than I trust people, because the reality is once it's set there, we know what our expectations are. We know how the process should work if something happens. I'd rather address those things, even if they are unlikely to happen, because let's say it is like your brother, or something. Sometimes those are the problems. It's even a family relationship where the guy's like, oh, my brother won't screw me. The reality is family sues family all the time. You still want to get stuff documented. And like Zach was talking about, when people start a company, operating agreements are key, because that's really what you do is early on, you set the rules and now you know how you operate, and it preserves that friendship. It preserves that company's ability to grow. Like having stuff written is not something that should scare you or the org itself. It should be something that, helps preserve that team from breaking down.
Yeah.
And the big theme, Adam, you and I are just synced on brainwaves.
Go ahead, Zach. I know. Go for it.
I think the big theme and the biggest takeaway here, and John really hit it, is they trust they trust their players and their friends. They trust their coach. You know who they're not listening to? The lawyers. And it's the strangest concept ever to imagine, because in industries, in other entertainment industries, whether you're an actor, you're a musician, you're a sports player, you're talking to your lawyer constantly because you understand the value that they bring. These are individuals who, for some reason, do not trust lawyers. They don't trust internal lawyers. They don't trust their own lawyers. Everyone in this industry thinks they're out to get us. and they're not really out here to help us. They just want to get their piece of the pie. And it's probably the biggest barrier to entry into this industry is that you have to earn the trust of the devs, you have to earn the trust of the publishers, the players, the content creators. You have to show that you bring value to the table. Otherwise, even if they're paying you, they might not listen to you, as both Justin and John has demonstrated.
Yeah, I think, and one of the reasons they don't, at least from the players' side, might not necessarily trust lawyers, and this is frankly and thankfully a lot better now, but two things to what both Zach and John mentioned really quick is I can't tell you how many times, some of these lesser orgs have said, if you get a lawyer to look at this agreement, we're pulling the deal, which should raise like every single red flag in the entire world, even if you are someone who doesn't necessarily trust lawyers or think that lawyers are someone you need to work with. Like, oh, if you show this to somebody who's going to review it on your behalf and explain it to you, we're pulling this, or you have to sign this by tomorrow because we want to make an announcement, and basically saying don't have a lawyer review this without actually saying that, because you're not going to get a lawyer unless you have one on speed dial to review something for you in like a 12-hour turnaround time. And then the second point, more to what John was talking about, is, and you'll even see this with some GMs in top tier orgs still to this day, and they don't necessarily mean anything by it. They might actually genuinely believe this, but they'll say, yeah, I know this language here lets me fine you 25% of your salary if you show up late to practice one day, but we're never going to do that. Like, come on, you don't have to delete it. And to John's point, like, it's still on the page then. Why does it need to be on the page if you're never going to use it? So yeah, it's just another reason it's important to have folks in your corner.
Yeah, that pesky good behavior bonus, which, this very punctuality good. I don't understand what that means. Does that mean you're on time? You're 5 minutes late? I know my lacrosse coach always said, if you're on time, you're late. And if you're late, don't show up. So, that's kind of how I approach things. But, I think that, as you mentioned, these are the kind of things that you can push back on hard, because this shouldn't be part of the equation. And, I've done coach deals where they kind of have these good behavior things. And it's like, the coach is supposed to be in charge of everyone. Like, why would you be judging him on the standard of a player when he's supposed to be in the chaperone and the headmaster and, the principal of all these kids? So I just think that some of these things are a little disingenuous. I think it kind of comes from either the team themselves just not even thinking about it, or them just used to people just kind of signing it and moving it forward. And, to everyone else's points earlier, is they call it negotiation for a reason. If it was called take it or leave it, then they would just say that. And, I think that kind of opens up the kind of vibe of that's not how you should start a relationship, especially in these talent and entertainment driven worlds. You want to enter an agreement where they feel confident, you feel confident, you as a player feel that this is a great situation for you. They believe in you. They want to take care of you, and they're not trying to take advantage of you. Because if that's how it starts, let me tell you, it's probably not going to get better. And, chances are it's going to get worse way quick. And, I think in these, spaces, whether you're a pro gamer or a musician or, a model or anyone, you want to be in a relationship that is going to be beneficial to your growth and something you feel comfortable with. And I think that's where some of the negotiation, whether it's through lawyers or agents or managers or, just any independent professional, can kind of help you have a deal that you maybe feel, more comfortable with. And I'm sure everyone here can echo is these agreements are kind of evolving. The same agreement that you might have gotten a year or two ago isn't what teams are offering. They're starting to see, okay, well, we maybe have to include some incentive clauses or some kind of ways to kind of sweeten the pot, when usually before we would just, give them a salary and call it a day. So I think that, as more individuals like, our peers are getting involved, you're starting to get more flexibility in the overall arrangement to begin with.
Yeah. And what Justin said is 100% true, because I can just say this happened to me on Friday, basically, where an org, and I'm not going to say which one, but they're funded. They have massive investors that you would know, gave us a contract, and they'd given us the same player, same contract kind of thing about a year prior. The one a year prior had some of the worst clauses I've ever seen in my entire life, about how basically if we make any introductions to you, we own 50% of the money you make from that introduction forever. stuff that's just absolutely insane. And the fact that, like we can sell you at any point, we can basically force you to sign a deal with a new team at any point on any terms we want you to sign, stuff like that. That's barely even legal, if anything, and we passed, obviously, because I was just like, they weren't going to budge. A year later, the deal we gave us, pretty fair. There were like 4 or 5 things that we kind of pushed on a little bit more. And it was more of one of those things where you can kind of see when they first kind of started off, they were like, oh, we're going to go heavy handed. And now they're like, yeah, we can't get away with that,
I want to hop in here and move to, no, I'm gonna pass it off to you, Justin. I just want
All right, thank you.
I wanted to mention that Zach has a meeting at 1:30. So I wanted to get his thoughts on this last topic that Justin's gonna ask.
Yeah, so at this point, we'd like to transition and talk about the future. And obviously a hot topic is the NFTs. And Zach, we'll hand this off to you first, but I just wanted to mention that I seen the glimpse that John had shown of his trading cards, and it instantly made me think of Top Shot and that LeBron James highlight selling for about $230 million. So I think it'll be a great discussion, and wanting to hear from you all. Thank you.
Yeah, the NFT crypto Bitcoin is slowly weaving its way into gaming. I think you're going to see it hit at an accelerated rate. I was actually just reading an article. There was a game called My Neighbor Alice that was released on Binance, and within 30 seconds, it raised over 600%. NFTs are going to play a big role in this as well. You're going to start to see games somewhat similar to a loot box situation, or cosmetic options, where you're now going to have value, actual intrinsic value attached to digital items, especially if companies are going to put this on a blockchain, if they're going to abide by only producing a handful of them. The issue and the thing that I would warn individuals against is that, well, yes, that cow with the bow tie that you purchased for this one game, just sold for 10, 15, 20, $100,000. Well, that's value is only there as long as that game and that server is up and running. At least that's how I see it from a gaming perspective. You're going to see NFTs and art and all that continue to expand outside of gaming, as you're seeing it already today. However, I also think that this is, at least right now, it's the hot trend. It's what everyone's talking about in Clubhouse. You're seeing it now being blasted all over BuzzFeed and Bloomberg. Like all other hot things, it will eventually fizzle out, and it will continue. It will continue then in the back end of things like Top Shot. I also look at Top Shot and I kind of laugh at it as who's going to pay $2 million for a LeBron James digital trading card. I mean, the whole purpose of having trading cards and having a value attached to them is it's a physical good that that they printed only so many of. But that's just my 2 cents on what the NBA is doing. It's a way for them to print money.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's already, as you mentioned, starting to become a lot more prevalent in games where you can have these items, whether it's a skin or a weapon, a limited edition kind of thing, and put it on a blockchain and it could be sold to another person. And I know recently this past weekend, Simplicity Esports announced that they're going to be having an NFT. And I guess one of the CEOs was kind of mentioning of maybe NFTs to some of the images that they might own. Maybe they're going to create some, gamer collectible cards. I know OG Esports had done a 2018 Dota championship ring that was a digital collectible that you could buy as an NFT. So starting to see it kind of seep in. And I think as more, IP and content holders start seeing the value in it, they're just going to keep, doing it. I'm wondering what that 3,000th home run for Derek Jeter if David Price goes for. I'm thinking about some of these iconic moments of, folklore and sports that, that the shot by Michael Jordan that we always see against the Jazz, like some of these really historic memories are going to be valuable. And I think that, your point about the physical versus digital is a lot of the people that this is kind of aimed for is they're kind of already in a digital world. Well, it's digital books, news, music. Like they probably never had a CD or a tape, cassette player or a CD Walkman. Like I'm sure most of us had where, an iPod was their first music, anything. So they're really used to their content being in this kind of digital form. So it makes sense that while me and you had, baseball and hockey cards and binders, they're going to be having it in their, crypto wallet.
Well, and I think what Justin and Zach just touched on is actually super nuanced and interesting for gaming in general. It's just the concept of ownership versus licensing to begin with. The average person thinks they go out and buy a video game. I honestly don't remember the last time I bought a video game. I'm pretty sure I bought a license since honestly 2007-ish, basically since the internet started kind of touching games a lot more on a regular basis. And like Zach was saying, I mean, the problem with even, NFTs and stuff like that is how many can they print? And even then, what happens when the server that hosts the thing goes under? A lot of these, I saw an engineer friend of mine kind of do a giant breakdown on it. And he's like, at the end of the day, they come back to like an image link half the time. Like there's a lot of code in there, don't get me wrong. But, when certain things just die, that thing can just disappear, and the reality is like you get something like this, you get excited, it's Zion Williamson, he's a big deal, it's a cool card, but how many of those got printed? Even when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, the stuff that's going to have value is the stuff that's like this one says like 4 out of 5. That's really when it's going to start to matter, because that's the thing that's got limited scarcity, and I mean, whether or not this is a good investment for people down the road, NFTs in general, sports cards, whatever else, Bitcoin, that's up for them to decide. I'm not trying to give investment advice, but it's a very interesting market to just kind of take note of as people try to hedge bets against the dollar.
I think this is super interesting, and I'm not going to touch on the and I think John touched on this a little bit, but the IP issues that might arise when you're talking about NFTs, because as we've said, the law hasn't caught up to digital technology or esports in terms of IP or privacy yet. So it'll probably get to NFTs sometime between colonizing the moon and colonizing Mars. But just taking this, I think it's really interesting, some of the potential this has, particularly stepping away from the collector side of it to the more utilitarian side of things, like NFTs for concert tickets, et cetera, that can be authenticated via the blockchain. And, from a content creator perspective, I think it's very interesting because it potentially allows us to get to the place where a, piece of content that, somebody like Mizkif or Alexander Botez or XQC or Nick Merckx puts out and can be authenticated via the blockchain. And then anytime that's sort of reproduced, they would see a royalty from that. And obviously the streamers I just mentioned aren't the folks that necessarily need that. They're doing quite well, but this could, allow for other streamers who are just up and coming or maybe not as famous to, realize some gains from the content they're creating, to avoid it just having it out there in the ether constantly. So I think from that perspective, it's pretty interesting.
All right, I think those are all of the questions that I had from Justin and myself, but we would love to hear some questions from the audience. Zach, you have 5 or 6 minutes. You said it was a hard stop at 1:30. So if anyone has a question for Zach right off the bat, just unmute yourself and shoot.
The awkward silence of Q&As.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Hannibal Travis. I teach IP at FIU College of Law. Thanks to all of our panelists for coming. I'm not sure who this question is for exactly, but I wanted to ask about mods and making money from modifying game content, writing new scripts and producing items and the like. I know some people are getting paid on Patreon. Some people get paid by Steam. How has that evolved in the last year or two? And will Xbox or PlayStation be more open to it in coming generations?
Ooh, this is a great question. So we can look at Epic Games for a big look at what I believe the future for modding will be. And I think you can fit this in 2 buckets. You have people who are creating exploits, aimbots, et cetera. And then you have people who are trying to enhance content. The enhancing content, I think, will always continue. I think it's right now very encouraged by developers. You see that Minecraft went from just a casual game to blowing up simply because of the modding community that was behind it. What I do believe you're going to see a lot more of, and Epic, I believe, was the trailblazers in this, is developers and publishers suing players who are creating exploits. It's against the terms and conditions, which I know everyone just scrolls to the bottom and click I agree, but it is a formal contract between you and that developer or publisher to license that game, and you have to abide by those rules to play that game. And when you start selling those exploits, you are now in violation of the DMCA, the anti-circumvention clause. You are in violations of the terms and conditions, and you are fostering a cheating community, which the devs don't want. And I know it looks ridiculous when you see Epic suing a 13 and 14-year-old kid, but at the end of the day, they have to protect their community, they have to protect their game, and you're going to start to see more and more devs following that lead. Just the other day, Rockstar and Take-Two got one of the big modders for GTA Online taken offline, and they had to take all of the revenues that they made from selling their mod and had to give it back to Take-Two. It's going to be much, much more common.
Good. Yeah. We got to stop the cheaters, right? We don't want these people ruining the integrity of the game. And, like modding, which is, such a huge part of esports, like, Counter-Strike was a mod, Dota 2 and League of Legends were mods from, Warcraft 3. So the origins of where we are today came from this community that's encouraged by the developers. But they also have to stop cheating because it harms everyone. And, I'm sure the publisher's main goal is to protect the end user and the integrity of their game. They don't want you to load up and think that every Warzone game, there's going to be a cheater ruining it for you, because you're not going to want to play that after a while. And then it kind of starts a trickle down effect and hits everything else.
Yeah, I think it's largely company dependent, game dependent, in terms of service dependent, based on how they handle a lot of this, because certain games are wanting, you to constantly do mods, something like Roblox, for example. Again, Zach mentioned earlier, though, the problem is the moment I let you do whatever you want in my game, you're going to recreate stuff, example used with Moe's Tavern. That again opens up legal issues. The reality is these companies are getting a lot more sophisticated and nuanced on their end, even if the law itself is still kind of murky. So they're willing to kind of jump into that quagmire a little more than they were in the past. Microsoft obviously bought Minecraft, they've bought Bethesda. Both of those companies had mods, still have mods. I wouldn't be surprised if they get a little more open than they were a decade ago when it comes to things. Like the Xbox ecosystem in general has always been very closed off by comparison to, say, PC, largely because of what Zach and Justin started talking about when it comes to, cheating and things like that. The moment they open it up, they're worried, those kind of exploits come into play too, not just the good kind of mods.
And to develop tools, this is something that as Lawston, you might not be aware of. I wasn't even aware of it as a gamer, and it wasn't until I became a lawyer and started brokering some of these deals that I became aware of it. Sony and Microsoft and Nintendo have extremely strict agreements to develop for their platforms. Nintendo has opened it up a little bit to be more indie dev compliant and friendly. Same with Microsoft to some extent, but Sony is the holy grail of a black hole. There's no negotiation with these rules. If you want to develop for their platform, you need to sign a very, very strict developer license agreement to get the dev kits. If you want to create tools that will be used by 3Ps for Sony, you have to sign a tools agreement. These things are extremely restrictive. So if you're going to be opening up your game for mods on console platforms, until Sony, Microsoft, and these bigger players start relaxing some of these agreements to develop for it, you're just not going to see it.
Yeah, and I think just real quick, for law students, right, a mod it's a derivative work, and there's a question out there as to whether that derivative work is transformative or not, and that's probably taken by a case-by-case basis. But I think, as everybody touched on, I think mods are kind of here to stay. Zach mentioned GTA. Some of the most popular content on Twitch right now is sort of these, GTA mod servers where you sort of go in and you basically role play and you act, and that gets thousands and thousands of concurrent views. And then John mentioned Roblox, which is sort of a platform that's built on creating mods. Like each game for Roblox is very it's a mod of the platform. But to what Zach just mentioned, though, is that the contract you sign with Roblox, at least as of now, they're doing quite well, but it's very restrictive. Roblox it has control over a ton of the IP. Even the IP that you're creating, you're giving them a very, very expansive license to that. If you go to Roblox and look at those terms of service, it's extraordinarily broad. So that's something that, from the creator's perspective, you need to be cognizant of as well. But I think, as these publishers grow more sophisticated and realize the potential for mods, they're going to be, pretty heavily regulated, but I don't think it's something that's going away. I think it's something that's going to become part of games to the point where it's almost ubiquitous.
And as Justin said, a lot of the games that we play today derive from some form of mod. But what Adam was just referencing, if you're trying to create a game, you need to be cognizant of that from the start. If you go start your game in Roblox and then kick it off somewhere else, there's legal complications that could come apart,
Yeah, I just wanted to, Zach just had to leave, but if he watches the recording back, I want to thank him for being here, and I appreciate all of the input and insight that he had. If anyone has another question for Justin, Adam, or John, just unmute yourself.
I have one question for any of you guys to answer. So with Fortnite, a big legal issue recently over the past few years has been like the dance moves that they sell in the store, and content creators suing over that. And now with TikTok too, you have content creators creating their own dance moves. So like, what legal remedies do content creators have to enforce the copyright of their dance moves?
Well, I think most of those Fortnite cases were dismissed, as I recall, because if we look at what it takes to make something a copyrightable, a work worthy of copyright protection, you have to have that modicum of creativity in addition to putting it in a tangible medium. And I think what the floss or for example was just it's one move that's not really it's more of a part of a whole than an actual work. If we're talking about a full choreographed thing, that's obviously a different conversation. But I think based on the opinion of the Copyright Office and also the federal district courts, I think the burden is on these creators on TikTok to sort of prove, okay, what I'm doing is more than just one or two moves, because at that point it's not necessarily something that is protectable, or in my opinion should be protected. People should be able to make dances out of moves if they want.
Well, and that segues in perfectly just to the concept of you typically can't copyright game mechanics. The same way we wouldn't want you to be able to copyright a basic dance move. Like if you're the only one who can swing your arm a certain way, that limits everyone else's ability to continue to do something the same way, being the only game that can have a double jump, and that just harms the entire ecosystem. Something you guys might not even be aware of is a lot of those dances are actually animated here in Central Florida. So I know a lot of you guys are going to be Florida students, obviously. It's a nice little tie-in there.
On this topic of copyright, I had the question about athlete tattoos and video games. They have been subject of copyright litigation before, and I was wondering if there are still unsettled questions as to whether tattoo artists can claim copyright infringement in video game likenesses.
I mean, I think it's pretty well established from, I went with 2K and the WWE games, which I feel like that's where a lot of it is if you have this really fanciful design that the tattooed artist makes. I know we all think of the Mike Tyson and Hangover 2 of that thing that was on his face that was then replicated on, one of the characters. It's like, this is this really original concept, creative work. I think something, if you just write mom in, red with bubble letters, that might not be as fanciful as this really elaborate design. And as the creator, whether you're putting it on someone's skin or on, a piece of canvas, you're still an artist and you're still the creator and you still have these rights unless there's an agreement to the contrary. And I think that's the biggest thing that, we definitely work with talent who actually give their tattoo artists releases that give them the rights to this stuff. So if they're maybe on a TV show or digitized in a video game, they have the rights to the underlying artwork and they don't have to worry about it. So, I think if you as a video game developer are digitizing, this really elaborate tattoo that LeBron has on his back, chances are the designer, the tattoo artist has some rights unless, LeBron has secured them. And it's starting to become a pretty prevalent practice these days.
I had another question about sports travel, and Adam, you might be able to answer this one. In regards to the esports athletes traveling from country to country, can you talk about some of the visa problems and issues with whether the gamers are categorized athletes, and what kind of visa issues might arise from that?
Yeah, so I'll first couch this off by saying I'm not an immigration attorney. That's not sort of my area. But we work obviously with a handful of excellent immigration attorneys to handle this very issue, because that question does arise, particularly for games like League of Legends and Overwatch, which a large portion of their player base is from Europe or obviously South Korea and China. So it, given the limited amount of visas that are granted each year, it sort of becomes an issue for that has to be navigated for. Can the teams sponsor these players? What do they have to do to bring them over? Are they considered athletes to the point where they can get that athlete visa? Or this also ties into the question of whether or not they are employees, and that's a completely separate conversation. The independent contractor versus employee distinction that if you're familiar with California AB5 and similar laws in other states, is something that's going to come to a head in esports at some point. But yeah, going back to immigration, a lot of what the teams will try to do is sort of put the risk contractually on the players, and sort of basically say, if you don't get the correct paperwork or the visa done, we can terminate for cause. But you got to fight against that too, right? And you have to make sure that actually the burden should be on the team to make sure it's doing everything correctly. And but yeah, I don't want to go into too much for fear of saying the wrong thing, as I'm not an immigration attorney.
Yeah, as I know in my practice we handle visas for different players in different games. I would say the biggest kind of hurdle right now is really explaining to the immigration officers themselves what's going on here. Okay, especially in leagues that are maybe new, like a PUBG or Rainbow Six, or some of these maybe haven't been around for as long as League of Legends for a better part of years, is being able to explain to these officers of the government who don't know what video games are. They might know Ninja and Fortnite, but other than that, everything else is really foreign to them. So I've noticed that you have to really kind of hold their hand and really provide a lot of unique info that you might not necessarily have to do if you're trying to get a DJ or an other more mainstream talent a visa. And I think what's nice, and you have some countries like Germany where they've actually created a specific visa category for esports players and competitors to make getting a visa for that a lot easier, which I think really incentivizes growth and incentivizes teams and organizers to base their events out of there, because they'll know that people from foreign countries will be able to get it easier and won't have some of these immigration officials who they're government officers, are doing the best they can, but to look through the applications and understand what being signed to Team Liquid, that's part of League of Legends Championship Series, it's that doesn't mean anything to them unless you explain, okay, well, this team is owned by Mark Cuban and the other owners in this league are the Wilpons and these other people, and these are the kind of sponsors that are involved. You have Mercedes and McDonald's and Red Bull, and you kind of have to paint a picture for them a little bit, because it's all really foreign to them. And then you sometimes get these FREs because they just don't understand what's going on, which totally slows down the whole process. And I'm sure people can see in the news, you have players missing tournaments, missing starts of seasons because the visas just doesn't come through in time. A lot of it is kind of the back end administration just not really knowing or having all the information they need to be able to issue the visa. And, it just causes these problems where, players will either get dropped if their contract says, okay, well, we signed you for a season, but you're not going to get your visa until 1 month left. So we don't really have a use for you, and
Exactly. Just another example of the legal industry playing catch up.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I have a question. Raquan King, former or alumni of FIU Law. I was wondering, I guess, kind of what if betting is a concern kind of in the gaming industry, in the esports industry, and if that, monitoring that and regulating that, I guess, suppose is the same that it would apply to regular sports. Because I know recently in League of Legends in China, a player had come out about being paid or betting on games, and there was a whole investigation into fixing in that aspect. And so when it comes to esports, is like, I guess the legal implications and the regulation of all of this is the same as regular sports, or is there another layer that these kind of leagues have to be concerned about?
I would say it's very similar to regular sports in a lot of ways on some of that. I mean, every contract I feel like I've ever seen has some kind of clause that says you will not try to fix games or bet on your own games or do something like that. That's pretty standard to see something like that thrown in there, just to be in like a code of conduct or something, just because, again, you don't want that any more than you would in professional sports. It ruins the entire integrity of it. But once we get outside of like the actual players themselves, and let's say the general public, you got to remember that this is an area of law that is still an absolute mess. You're starting to see it get moved forward by people like DraftKings and whatever else, but they're pushing for fairly narrow legislation that covers what they need. They're not necessarily trying to carve out a path for the people to come behind them, even though that's typically what you're going to want to do. Is you're going to want to try to find a big kind of shark like that and become like that remora on the paths they're finding for you. But like I said, I think I said this earlier, when you start getting into skill contest exemptions from, let's say, the whole just betting kind of industry in general, you have to follow every single state's rules. And you're going to find out pretty quickly that I think it depends on exactly what you're doing, but there's something like 8 to 11 states that you can't even touch. Let's say we start going to outside the US, Quebec's off the list immediately. Brazil's typically off the list immediately. There's a handful of places that you got to be very, very careful of. And for example, Brazil is a huge esports country. Like they have tons of talent down there, tons of people interested in this space. To lose a market like that is a big deal for an international company, especially.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's also a history of match fixing and, scandals in esports. I know recently there was some CSGO players that had issues for this. And, back in the day, StarCraft 2 had some really suspect kind of things where I think recently there's some people in Australia that maybe were even arrested and brought up on charges for, match fixing as it relates to this stuff. So, it's definitely a big issue that, is a problem.
Yeah, and to those points, like as John mentioned, Murphy decision, Murphy v. NCAA, which was decided a few years ago, basically took the idea of legalizing sports wagering out of the hands of the federal government and left to the states. A lot of states, immediately, started putting sports wagering laws on the books. Now, if you take a look at where we're at now, I think maybe there's around 20 or so states that have on the books sports wagering laws. I think esports, is addressed in either the legislation or the subsequent regulations in maybe 4 or 5 of them. I think Colorado, New Jersey, Virginia, and maybe a couple others I can't think off the top of my head. New Jersey is an interesting case because they were, I think, after Delaware, the second state, and obviously Nevada, to formally legalize sports wagering, but the initial New Jersey legislation flat out, prevented, betting on esports. I think for some of primarily for the reasons Raquan mentioned, and this is where you see the restrictions coming into play, is that esports, the idea being that a lot of the professionals are younger than 18. It's sort of the same idea as to why you can't bet on high school sports, for example, because they're more prone to, the temptation, if you will, of match fixing. But now, as we can see, New Jersey is actually kind of modifying that. A bill just passed, I think, unanimously in their assembly and is going forward in the Senate, that would allow specifically for the betting on esports, so long as I think the majority of participants are over the age of 18. And I think you see that in some other states as well. New Jersey is actually already allowed for betting on LCS. I think some CSGO stuff, similar with Nevada, similar with Colorado. And so I think in that sense, I think that's folks are going to recognize, if you're the reason policy-wise that you're legalizing sports wagering is, the economics incentives and the revenue that can generate. People are obviously, as we've talked about today, it's a $1 billion industry. People are going to see that in esports and want to legalize, or include esports wagers as part of that. But I think it's going to be couched with, okay, it has to be, sanctioned by some sort of governing body is another regulation you see, whether that's LCS, whether that's CDL, and then it also, the majority of participants have to be over 18 to address that match fixing that John and Justin both talked about, which was fairly prevalent back in the day and still is in a lot of places.
Well, and once we get outside of, let's say, the professional leagues, the amount of people who want to do, let's just say, a wager bet on themselves in a 1v1 tournament, I will honestly bet that I have had more people pitch me that startup than any other startup on the planet.
The 1v1,
and it's always the one where I have
you're
to
all agreeing.
remind
I love
them-
it.
I always have to remind them that there's a reason why nobody does this right now, or at least legally.
Why someone just raised $2 million from Sterling VC, the 1v1 app.
Oh, it's like, and then to your point, John, it's like this is when you're not even talking about sports wagering anymore. You get into, is this a game of chance or is this a game of skill? And the laws, while they're largely the same, you have the dominant factor, material element, or so-called like any chance test, they're still slightly different across all of those states. And when we have clients who come to us that want us to do that, we have to sort of basically give them an opinion that accounts for all 50 states. And we're like, okay, as your lawyers, if you want to do this right, as you mentioned, you have to sort of look at this from a multi-state perspective. And yeah, it's a very popular idea.
And then when you tell them you need to give them an opinion on all 50 states, they kind of wonder, okay, how much does that cost? Don't you already have that? And you have to remind them, these laws are changing every other week. I can't just give you what I did 8 months ago for somebody different.
Yeah, all the games are different. Like Hearthstone has a ton of RNG and is likely, probably going to be considered more of a game of chance than, FIFA or CSGO or something like that.
Hearthstone's a perfect example because there is legislation on the books that says the moment you touch a card, that's different, because again, they're trying to maybe carve out poker or something else just to kind of have their own stances on it. And this is probably the two areas I feel like when it comes to a community-driven kind of or small startup kind of company that they always get into a mess with esports is this kind of skill contest area and then the licensing area. Because the fact that the difference between esports and like football is anybody can go play football. I can get a football and I can just go out and start my own league. It's not going to be the NFL, but I can make my own league. You can't go out and just make your own Call of Duty league. You can't go out and just make your own Madden league. It becomes a mess, and that's an entire other quagmire that could be a 3-hour discussion.
I think I see Dean Page is on here, and he had something that he wanted to say.
Yeah, hello. I'm Dean here at the law school, and I have been listening with great interest over the last hour and a half, almost hour and a quarter. And I've got to say that a lot of what you're discussing, well, when I was at law school, we couldn't possibly have discussed it. So I did want to take a moment just to thank all the panelists. I realized one had to drop off early, but I wanted to thank you all so much for coming and talking to our students and our alumni. And other interested people. We really appreciate that. Having this kind of participation from, real lawyers out in the field is vital to our program of legal education. So I wanted to personally just express thanks for that. Also, I guess I'd also like to express thanks to, I'm going to try and get the name right, the Sports, Entertainment, and Fashion Law Association here at FIU Law. They've really done a great job putting together this whole sequence of events. And I understand that the plan is to do this in future years and maybe even expand and definitely have things going on in person. So special thanks to that student association as well. And of course, thanks to participants. I heard some great questions and listeners as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Really enjoyed being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
No, thank you.
It was a pleasure. Justin, I know you wanted to show everyone your book. And
Oh yeah, he kept holding up stuff, so I wanted to show everyone the essential guide to the business and law of esports. Professional video gaming. It's out now everywhere you buy your books. Definitely give you some really unique insight on what's going on in the legal world, and has some of these language from some of these contracts that we've been kind of talking of, and gives you some breakdown on what it means and how you might operate in this field.
Yeah, thank you guys all very much. It was incredibly interesting. I had a blast moderating it, and I hope that we are able to have you, I know it's a long trip for some of you, but have you on FIU's campus in the future.
Love that. Thank you, guys.
No, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And if anyone has any questions, definitely feel free on LinkedIn, my messages, emails, DMs. It's my pleasure to, impart any wisdom I can.
Likewise.
Same. I'll just warn you, I'm going to be underwater for the next couple of days, so don't expect a reply immediately. But I will definitely get back to you.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Have a great rest of the week.